We are back for the closing act of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. It's been a great time going season by season, back so many years to perhaps the most influential television series on my childhood. It's between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. I managed to watch more Pokemon, but Yu-Gi-Oh! When I did get to see it, was my favorite. My hope is that I've managed to draw out enough quality information from the story over the course of these videos to do it much needed justice. Dawn of the Duel is a different sort of season. There's a sweeping change in the locale and atmosphere. We travel through the sands of time, deep into the history underlying so much of what we've witnessed up to this point. The world we've been exposed to in pieces, from Pegasus's exploration leading to the origin of Duel Monsters as a card game, the gravekeepers who live deep within the sands of Egypt with their unique cultural practice, the origin of the Millennium Items, the birthplace of the Pharaoh whose past holds such central mystery, the land of the gods, and more. All roads point to Egypt, and so of course this is our end destination, where we're gonna go to find clarity and resolution. Our curiosity for this place has been hammered in hit by hit through the past seasons. It's gratifying to finally get our feet down in the ancient land. This season is about completing the identity of both sides of the main character, building them up to having a standalone, stable existence as two separate people, ready to go their own way. Little Yugi is once and for all learning independence, pinnacle strength, and all the traits he envies in the Pharaoh. The characters are taking another leap of convergence toward one another. But once little Yugi has adapted these noble traits, becoming his best self, and the Pharaoh is able to fill in those missing parts of his past that have been forgotten with the sands of time, there's a level of total fulfillment where these two souls no longer need one another. Their paths come to a divide where it's at last time to part ways. There's an enormous exchange of mutual contribution between them, each bringing to the table an irreplaceable gift of insight. The Pharaoh, by leading the way down so many conflicts with his head held high, unshakable resolve, faith in himself, in his cards, the strength and skill to outwit every opponent, taught his younger self to eventually surpass him, which is exactly what ends up happening at the end of this season, finalizing a series-spanning goal. Little Yugi brings the Pharaoh something he didn't have in his last life: close support to steady his hands, to be fearless and find the answer to his greatest problem from history. This time, rather than having to sacrifice himself, the Pharaoh is able to defeat Zork and move on to the afterlife where his loyal followers await him, bringing a bittersweet but satisfying closure to the series. The story began with this Pharaoh spirit resurrecting into the holder of the Millennium Puzzle, but there's a riveting question of why this even happened. What was the point of the Pharaoh resurrecting? Here we subtly learn that Kaiba's ancient self created the Tablet of Memories, that if you recall becomes activated when the Pharaoh approaches, wielding the Egyptian god cards. These are powers that we learn early in the season the Pharaoh didn't possess 3,000 years ago, and they were the crucial addition to his strength that, when combined with his name, allowed him to survive the conflict with the dark god of Yugioh. So we can now understand why the show even began. It was ancient Kaiba trying to save his friend from being sealed forever. Many stars needed to be aligned for this to be pulled off, and maybe none more interesting than the unraveling of the maze encasing the Pharaoh's identity. When you think about the show Yu-Gi-Oh!, you probably picture the guy with spiky hair, and then the Millennium Puzzle. The puzzle is many things: its power, drawing out the mystical forces of ancient Egypt to pierce through the shadows, power to summon the three gods. It's a bridge allowing the Pharaoh to manifest into this world. As we can see from Egypt, it's this pyramid that connects the ancient world's history to the present. It's a tool of justice, but also born from darkness, as we see the items are used to judge criminals in Egypt. Though the purity and virtue of them are dubious once we find out that they were created through human sacrifice. But it first and foremost is a puzzle. But why is it a puzzle? It took little Yugi 8 years to put it together, I believe, which is an unbelievable amount of commitment for such a young person. It's almost impossible. But it speaks to the depth and complexity of its design. The physical structure of the most iconic object in the series is directly mapping onto the heart of the main character. The puzzle represents the mystery of the Pharaoh's identity, and as we progress through the season, his gradually restoring memories unravel it, eventually wiping out the labyrinth within and freeing his heart. Another interesting feature of the puzzle explored in this season is how this sacred item pushes the supernatural connection between the two sides of our main character even further. When little Yugi's inside the labyrinth, he's able to have a direct experience with the feelings of the Pharaoh. It's a barrier that separates ordinary people. Being lifted, he can feel his sadness. This closeness between them is heartwarming, no doubt. But the height of the season, without question, is when we break away from that perfect union that's been cultivated for so long, where the two characters are forced to turn against one another. But it's not a breakaway as far as feelings go. They aren't at odds with one another, but out of maturity and care for the pharaoh that goes beyond wanting to spend time with him, at the cost of not continuing their amazing adventures, little Yugi takes it upon himself to give his ultimate friend a proper send-off to the place he believes he belongs, and this demonstrates a higher level of love for this person, that if it's in their best interest, you'll see it through even at the cost of losing them. A lot of interesting things happen when they decide to break away from one another. Whenever little Yugi refers to the pharaoh, he calls him his other self. It's a unique concept in Yu-Gi-Oh, where two people with different pasts, from different times, different ages, personalities, strengths, weaknesses, can still be united under one spirit. The pharaoh is just a different appearance of the same soul that they share. This is implied all throughout the season from the first episode. Yugi's grandfather tells him that the owner of the Millennium Puzzle inherits the pharaoh's soul. Then near the end, Shizu mentions that Yugi reminds her of the nameless pharaoh's soul. I like this other one also with the Dark Magician girl, where she can't even distinguish Yugi from the pharaoh despite their obvious difference in appearance. But in the end, it's time for the two of them to take hold of their own selves, especially the pharaoh who needs to find his own place in the world. He's constantly referred to as the nameless pharaoh, and I thought that was so interesting. From the very start, he's talked about as someone missing a quality that everyone else has, such a personal thing. It becomes a normal occurrence, but as time goes by, I start to wonder if this is a problem that's going to get addressed. And indeed, it's pivotal in the grand scheme of the show. It's easy to appreciate the discipline in letting that curious element cook for so long, then address it at the end. In this arc, we see that no one knows his name. They all just call him Prince or Pharaoh, and I think this has something to do with his standing in the world. The people don't know him for him. He's reduced to the role that he fills, and his identity is lost to time because of this. But through his friends who have come to understand and appreciate him, journey after journey, they're able to recover his true name, his existence beyond authority, beyond the pharaoh. Finding his name is one piece of the greater puzzle to bring forth the full nature of the pharaoh, and it's this character development that upon clearing, allowed him to overcome the main enemy of the arc, entangling the conventional conflict resolution with the strides of character progression. After this stage, there's a discomfort in the relation between Atem and Yugi, where Yugi says, "I can't call you my other self anymore." Like Yugi put together the pieces of the Millennium Puzzle, Atem has perhaps completed the puzzle of his life, letting him at last be his own person. His departure is seen as a freeing of his soul, breaking out of the object that had caged him for so long. It took so much sacrifice for him to get to this point. His newfound old friends gave their life one after another, falling in the battlefield so that the light of hope could endure for another moment. What's interesting is the impact this has on the pharaoh, who doesn't actually remember any of them. But in furthering this theme of transcended ties, there's something that couldn't be removed even after thousands of years and having his memories sealed away. A spiritual link to these old friends, the memory of the heart. We see this play out again with Ishizu, where she feels some unexplainable grief upon seeing the Dark Magician destroyed. This is because way back when, her other self and him were good friends. This is another cool way the show uses its mystical element to heighten the character dynamics. It doesn't stop there either. When Atem's dueling Yugi at the end, we're informed that the deck they use in battle carries with it a piece of each opponent's soul, giving the past conflicts and glories a permanent and tangible mark that influences every duel to come. It's this mark that fuels both duelists with an uncontrollable resolve. The weight of this journey they've gone through as duelists literally strips their free choice away. As Joey says, they're no longer battling with their own free will, they're bound to the duel. For the pharaoh, pride has a lot to do with it. If you recall Duelist Kingdom, he was willing to kill as long as it meant winning, and it's that extreme aspect of his character that created such a magnificent duel with Raphael in the Atlantis arc. Pharaoh losing was unthinkable, it tore him to pieces. He had to be completely reconstructed, a new man, in order to step back into the game with competence. Entering into this duel for Yugi ensured that Atem would attempt to sink his fangs into him, and it's wild to see the lack of hesitation from the pharaoh. At the very start of this season, little Yugi tells him to stop holding back for his sake. The pharaoh plays things safe because he doesn't want him to get hurt, but here they emphasize so much that he's giving his full strength. He's put his whole heart into the most powerful deck he's ever made. He manipulates fate like an author forming the pages of a book, declaring the cards that he'll draw before drawing them, wielding all three Egyptian gods, and without a second thought, commanding obelisks to wipe Yugi out. It's a testament to how much dueling means to the pharaoh, but also a sign of deep respect that he has for little Yugi. Acknowledging the courage and resolve it took to stand before his best friend and try to beat him on what he's best at. He believes in him where no one else does. knows that Yugi can perform miracles himself, and this gives Yugi the opportunity to perform a feat beyond any other duelist, what Kaiba and everyone else thought impossible, defeating the three gods. But the twist in this duel is a point about strength. These hulking monsters who have a raw power that towers over all of their cards are used as an extreme example of power being a crutch for a duelist, subverting the established structure built up in Battle City. As he says, for a true duelist, power is just a ruse. The gods fall and they proceed to return to the old ways, classic dueling rife with strategy, using your trusted, loyal, modestly powered monsters strategically, reading the opponent, taking us back in time to the early moments of the series, cards like Summon Skull and Gaia the Fierce Knight, the unique expression of self that comes with constructing your deck. Each card is a part of you. As Yugi says, each card carries a piece of your soul. The Egyptian gods are part of Atem. As the pharaoh, they're monsters that symbolize his authority and might, later fusing together to externalize the power of the pharaoh's soul as the embodiment of light. But Atem is so much more than a pharaoh at this point. He got to the finish line of finding himself by the many facets of his bonds, and he must embrace them all in order to bring out the height of his power. Many would believe in the power of the gods, that they alone would bring one victory, but that belief takes the focus off of his faith in himself and his whole deck, or his entire soul, building off of Yugi's statement. And a duel is a battle of the soul. Once Atem unleashes that on Yugi, the mere dark magician can strike terror into his opponent. The last test for Yugi is a measure of the grasp he has on his higher self. If he can deconstruct, anticipate, and counter Atem. Yugi predicted many turns back the pharaoh's final move, and poetically used the item that first brought them together to separate them once and for all, by surgically specifying but a single card out of all the ones Atem might use and negate it with the Millennium Puzzle Box. This move stops Atem's monster from resurrecting into the world, sending it back to the afterlife, which is directly analogous to the bigger picture Yugi's shaping for the pharaoh in that moment. This is the move that would send the pharaoh back to the afterlife as well. Atem's departure is without question one of the saddest moments in fiction. He was such a good leader, so many respectable qualities stretched out over dozens of duels, always there to pull us out of the darkness. We've covered at length his compelling story, but he's really the main character. There's nothing dispensable about him. The embodied backbone of the series, he's like a father who's been with us for all time, to show us the way, protect us, and this separation is the final step on the mile-long road we covered to teach us how to grow up. That's what makes this show so potent in its messaging towards young people, and even if you're older, you've likely lived through this, so it's quite relatable and hits home. There's a lot of talk in this arc about friends passing on, comforted by their belief in those they leave behind to uphold their values into the future, and shape a world that's good. The light of their soul is passed on to the person entrusted to defend their ideals. Atem's departure is the final continuance of this tradition. This final battle brings him solace in leaving the rest to Yugi, now that he knows he possesses all the necessary traits to carry on the greatness of the pharaoh. Now let's turn to the use of light, darkness, the duality between them, moral ambiguity, and the hero-villain dynamic. We know how Atem as the pharaoh is the embodiment of light, a power he's able to realize once his identity is completed, through the collection of memories, his name, and bonds. These are the conditions to fuse the three gods. When those monstrous creatures are brought into unity, destruction doesn't fit as a description. There's calm, beauty, warmth, and light, neutralizing without anger or aggression the darkness of Zork or Bakura. But it was Atem's resurrection that caused Bakura to be reborn, as well as his father that indirectly caused the tragedy behind the Millennium items. It's the death of Bakura's village, and since Bakura, as he says, is Zork, or at least revives him, you could say the creation of the items is why Zork appears. The plight that the villain brings is one of the pharaoh's making, and since the pharaoh is a shared soul that's passed down through the generations, the burden falls onto Atem to atone for the mistakes of his father. But what's interesting is that the very power Atem relies on throughout the series is the product of this atrocity. It makes a lot of sense. There's dark power connected to the items. They make shadow games where people lose their souls. Despite the father's efforts to spare his son from his sins, the spirits of those lost find their way to Atem, and he invites their judgment, facing the curse that he inherits. This is another dimension of what distinguishes a pharaoh from an ordinary man. The standards aren't fair. It's not enough to take accountability for your own actions and stay virtuous. You must take accountability to all those who came before you, for the collective grief of the masses. This is the picture of Atem's divine purpose, After all, the pharaoh is understood as God himself in that culture, so this sort of self-sacrifice is quite fitting. But on the other end of the exploration of Atem's character, we get to know not only his ultimate purpose and mightiest self, but also his early ways, familiarizing ourselves with the young pharaoh. We've seen him with such presence, refinement, and strength for so long, that this inversion adds much appreciated dimension to his character. This is an attempt with more focus on care for others, balancing the playing field between him and the people, seeking equality. He's more of an emotional expressivist, learning the ropes of the world. Many angles of contrast to the lens we see him through ordinarily, but there's two really cool things about this short flashback. He exhibits characteristics deeply in line with little Yugi, who's much more emotional. Atem even comments at the end of their duel that he wouldn't be crying in his position. The pharaoh reminisces about Duelist Kingdom, where Yugi's kindness opposed the pharaoh's victory by any means mentality. The pharaoh calls it his strength. As little Yugi goes beyond the pharaoh's level, he's holding on to these qualities that his older self lacks, while finalizing his control of the core personal strengths of Atem. We see glimpses of the young pharaoh's parallel journey to self-sufficiency. His father, while loving and protective, was strict in pushing young Atem to carry his own weight, forming a three-point symmetry with Atem and Yugi's relationship. Atem's father makes him pull himself up when he slips off the edge, making Atem's mental training of Yugi the continuance of the fatherly tradition passed down from pharaoh to pharaoh. Even deeper is the fact that these qualities are ones the young pharaoh possessed, but left behind while growing up. Yugi becomes the composite identity that holds on to both sides of Atem at once, the man and the child, not letting go of those special virtues he had when he was young. This is an easily overlooked, unique message about the road to human betterment broadly. Hold on to your inner child, don't let them die. Keep it safe as you brave the struggles of the world. This is what it meant for Yugi to surpass his spirit guide. But what's crazy is this backstory doesn't run out here. His concern for equality between him and his societal underlings, his goal in shaping the world. As he describes it, I'll create a world where everyone can live freely, where social status doesn't matter. This may be the recipe to unraveling the root of his greatest enemy's creation, but Korra notes the disadvantage between them, him being a mere bandit against a pharaoh. He says that he doesn't like their status gap. He enters bound and chained to contend with Atem in his great palace. But Korra as a child got the bad end of this glorious kingdom of Egypt. For all their shining decadence, the parties and magic items, the lives of those less fortunate were the sacrifice paid for the kingdom's success. That evil sacrifice brought hate, which brought Bakura power in the darkness, hatred that the pharaoh's task was shouldering, and that his childhood ideal was designed to fix. But that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed it. This was Woski, and I'll see you later. Peace.